Hello, my name is Cyrus Schenck, and I have a confession. I shouldn't be here. See, I run a ski company, and skis and the environment don't go hand in hand. Both how they're manufactured, but also the subsequent infrastructure required to actually go and use them. Us ski companies have been living a double life because we produce the product that gets you out and closer to nature. And on the other hand, we're actually helping to destroy it. I think it's about time that we admit to this double life. So I'll be the first one to say, skis, ours included, are terrible for the environment, period. So what am I doing here? Why was I invited to speak at a climate summit? Well, I think it's about time we start the conversation around hard goods in the outdoors, because if we don't, we may not be skiing in the future. I'm going to tell you the story about Renoun, kind of how it got going, where we are today, and what we're doing for the future. As long as I can remember, I've been some sort of entrepreneur. In middle school, I rototilled gardens. In high school, I started a window washing business, which ironically ended up funding Renoun Skis, which I started in college. And growing up, my dad, he's one of those guys who always loved his job, right? And he taught us that if you didn't love your job, that it was your responsibility to actually go out and change it. And so later on, when I was in school at Clarkson University, I was studying aeronautical engineering, and about halfway through, I took a job or an internship at General Electric. And I realized that what I was doing and what I was being trained to become was something I didn't want to do. And if someone had given me my diploma, my degree that day, I would have put it on a shelf and done something else. So after 2.5 years of college and a GE internship under my belt, I dropped out. And when I got home, my mom, she told me she didn't understand, but she supported me. And my dad, well, it turns out he dropped out too, which I didn't know. And he also told me that he would support me in whatever I chose to do as long as it was actually legal, but that I had to go and do something, that I couldn't just sit at home on my butt. And I had one warning, and that this was it. So with a little bit of fire, I set out, around this time that I set out to actually start Renoun. And people always ask me like where the name Renoun came from, right? And I have some thoughts around naming because it's a pretty hard part of starting a business or launching a new product sometimes. And I think it's pretty straightforward in that unless you are building a hyper-local product like a hospital that's going to serve the very immediate community, there's two things you should never do. One is name it after yourself, and two, name it after where you're from. Other than that, it really doesn't matter. The product won't become the name will become the product. And if a company can have a $2 trillion market cap and be named after a piece of fruit, they'll be just fine. And Renoun's no different, except that I guess we actually did have a terrible name. We were called East Coast Skis, which is not only hard to say, but also was essentially marketing to only people who loved ice, which is very, very, very few. So I locked my friends in a room and we pulled out some cheap beer, dumped out Scrabble, and the next morning we had a list of names, and Renoun was one of them. And it wasn't until 2 years later that we realized that it was actually misspelled. So now with both a misspelled name and some fire and sage advice from my parents, I set out to actually start Renoun. And Clarkson, the school I just dropped out from, was nice enough to give me an office space where I could start building skis. And over the next 8 months, I went on to break almost every single fire code possible in that building. And through that fall, I hit the road and I started handing out these skis to my friends and family who had bought them and essentially pre-ordered them throughout the summer. And I quickly realized that what I was handing them was no different than anything else, right? Because we were buying the same materials from the same suppliers as every ski company. And that at the end of the day, a ski shape can only become so different. All right, at the end of the day, it's just a stick that slides on the snow. And if we were ever going to truly become world renowned, we had to do something actually different. So I thought back to my last and final semester at Clarkson, and there's this classification material that's called a non-Newtonian that I had come across. I thought was really interesting. And it was the stuff that at rest was really soft and malleable. But if you started injecting kind of energy into it, whether it's by punching it or shaking it, it got really stiff. The idea was I was going to take this crazy material that would go from soft to stiff and put it inside a pair of skis. And so I did some research, which just means I Googled and found out no one was doing it. So I called this guy, Jason Leventhal, and Jason, he started Line Skis, and which was sold to K2, and he was now running that division underneath K2 at the time. I call his house. I found his phone number in the phone book, and I call his house. I said, Jason Lementhal, my name is Cyrus Schenck, and I have an idea that's going to change the ski industry forever. And he said, okay, sounds good. And to his credit, he invited me in to have a meeting the next day. And I brought him this material, and I showed him how I could easily wrap it around my finger and then put it on the table and take a hammer and smash it. And that it changed so much that my finger was fine. I said I was going to put this crazy material inside a pair of skis. And he sat back and he laughed so hard. He said that in 25 years, he thought he had seen it all. And that this one just took the cake. But he also told me that I should do it. And he gave me the contact information for a factory up in Canada. When I went to Canada, and together we figured out how to actually produce these skis with this crazy material inside. And they gave me a quote for how much a production order would cost. And I remember I went back home and I was on the front steps of my friend Paul's house. I was eating a bowl of vanilla ice cream. And I was asking him what he felt I should do. And he said, well, what happens if you don't do it? It's like, well, I'll have $7,000 in that account, which was everything I had. And that $7,000 was only enough to cover the first 50% down deposit. I didn't even know how I was going to get the rest of it. He's like, okay, so you have $7,000. What happens if you go for it? What happens if you do it? And I said, I don't know. I have no idea. And Paul looked at me and he said, don't you want to find out? So 8 months later, I was smuggling the first batch of skis across the Canadian border. My sister's borrowed Honda Civic and arrived 43 minutes before our first launch party. And not long after that, we won our first ISPO award, which is the outdoor industry's largest trade show and one of their top honors. Not long after that, we were granted our first patent for this crazy idea inside skis and snowboards. And as they say, the rest is history, right? You know, we've been building and selling more skis than we ever have, direct consumer only. We're constantly evolving, expanding our patent portfolio. So now that it doesn't just include skis and snowboards, but also surfboards, boat hulls. And we're now putting this stuff inside and underneath basketball and gymnasium floors. And Shaq actually just installed one of our floors at his house. We're doing this for the team right here in Burlington. So what does this have to do with climate? Because I just told you the story about how a small ski company fought against the odds to make it. But what I didn't tell you is all the prototypes we threw away. All the miles that our skis are shipped every single day, or the amount of material that we scrap on every pair we make. Right? I didn't tell you the second half of this equation. Well, in the fall of 2020, Renoun became the first ski company in the world to commit to offsetting our entire carbon footprint. Is this enough? No, it's not even close. But it's a first step and a public admission to the second half of this problem. Essentially what we're doing is we're taxing ourselves and putting the money into a fund, into a pool, to make a viable business opportunity for somebody to come along and create the next plastic, to invent the next Velcro, to create a resin or epoxy that can be disassembled. So a board or a pair of skis can be taken apart and actually recycled before they're just thrown away. And since we've committed to this, 2 other ski companies have already followed. So next time you're going to buy a pair of skis or snowboards, ask your company what they're actually doing for the other half of this equation.